After the war, Europe's economy was broken. For France in particular, restoring the fashion industry was a point of national pride. Within just 2 years, Paris regained its status as the world capital of fashion and allure. Reveling in its recovery, fashion becomes dictatorial as the fashion press covers every movement designers make. The image on the left shows a fashion report explaining the exact measurement of hems from the ground. The two most influential designers are Christian Dior and Cristobel Balenciaga. Dior was a French couturier who would go on to become a global empire. Balenciaga, a couturier from Spain who moved to Paris, was considered the more artistic. He is a couturier's couturier and is still widely admired for his imagination and artistry. He incorporates tropes from his Spanish culture, and he is well worth studying on his own. In 1947, Christian Dior introduced his first collection, dubbed the New Look by the fashion press. Dior called it the Corolle line, after the parts of a flower. These dresses make women look like upside-down flowers. It is a sensational departure from the frugality and angularity of wartime fashion, reminiscent of military uniforms. The new look is also uncompromising. It called for intricate workmanship and a return to sewing techniques that had almost been forgotten. It requires serious undergarment engineering to create the distinctive curvaceous silhouette. And the phrase, "money is no object," would summarize the feeling. The pomp associated with the world's leading designers creating a new look meant millions of women had to buy new clothing immediately or look outdated. Both the UK and US governments pleaded with Dior to cancel the line. England was in the grips of rationing for years after the war as their economy slowly recovered. Some American women protested the new style. As you can see in the photo on the right, bystanders are tearing an early New Look dress off of the model who was in a photo shoot. Their protest would go unheeded because it was an immediate commercial success that will be copied at every price point. Fashion hadn't seen this much fabric and volume in day clothing in decades. A woman born in the 1920s would now be in her 30s and would never have seen anything like it in her lifetime, except old photos and paintings of the Victorian and Edwardian era, or Belle Epoque. And indeed, fashion takes us back in time, trying to wedge women back into the old social roles. The New Look silhouette, as you can see in the 1947 image toward the right, includes a rounded shoulder, a corseted waist, layers of skirts to create the shape. Some of the New Look skirts had as much as 25 yards of fabric in them. The hem is dropped low to the low shin, just revealing the full ankle. And the silhouette is a modified figure 8 shape. Evening wear lines reintroduced the bustle in both short and long lengths. At the left, we can see a couture designer version with a delicate bustle made of tulle netting and satin added to the back of a straight dress. In the right center, we see a mass market version, a full skirt with a bustle puff added to the back hips. The fashion ideal of a very small waist also returns, with larger skirts making the waist small by comparison. But some designer clothing required the use of a corset. We will also see a great deal of whimsy, with designers introducing 10 different silhouettes in 10 years, between 1947 and 1957, kicking off a frenzy of fashion. The fashion press follows pace-setting women all over the world wearing these different silhouettes. I will mention some of these major silhouettes here, but only 3 will influence the American market, and those are the 3 featured on the Vocabulary and Concepts handout. The first was the new look, or the figure 8. The proper name was the Corolle line. Dior also introduced an influential ensemble named the bar suit, which you can see at the left with a white jacket and a dark skirt. The bar suit had a modified Corolle skirt, a small corseted waist, and stiff basques over the hips. 3 years later, in 1950, designers introduced the antidote to the new look, the sheath or chemise dress, but it will not catch on in the American market. You can see in the photo at left a woman wearing it on the street with a woman wearing the new look walking just next to her. This style is ahead of its time, and it will become a hallmark of the 1960s. The second major silhouette is the pencil line. Later vintage collectors would refer to these styles as wiggle dresses. It evokes the pencil line of the 1930s with an attempt to reference that elegant sophistication. This look is stiffer and more constructed, however, emphasizing a small waist. Just as a side note, another silhouette introduced at the same time is the trumpet-shaped skirt, heavily influenced by flamenco gowns. Balenciaga created this silhouette for formal wear or evening gowns only. This style quickly became a classic, revived again and again. In fact, my Barbie doll in the 1960s had a dress just like this in green, and I was obsessed with it. It may be one of the reasons why I went into costume design. I finally got to design this dress for an entire chorus of men in Peter and the Starcatcher. In 1952, we see the bubble skirt, which also trickled down to the mass market. In 1954, Dior introduced the H line that flattened the bust and dropped the visual emphasis of the waist to the high hips. In 1955, Dior introduced the third important silhouette for Americans, the A line, which became a popular success. The skirts are not as large as the Corolle line, and it either skimmed the waist or placed less emphasis on it. In 1957, Dior introduced the trapeze line, shaped like a wedge, that ignored the waist altogether. These styles will usher in silhouettes from the 1960s. There's a distinct correlation between fashion and the art world in the 1950s that you might be interested in exploring further. America produces a high-end designer who is considered one of the most artistic designers in the world. Charles James produced influential dresses that current designers still reference. One of his most famous is the four-leaf clover gown seen at the left. The skirt shape is the result of such sophisticated engineering that one museum in Chicago recreated one to show an X-ray view. The antics of these male designers so outraged Coco Chanel that she came out of a peaceful retirement in 1954 to give women a practical alternative with comfort and style. Here we can compare a Chanel suit from her 1954 collection with one of Balenciaga's 1954 creations on the right. Many women did flock to Chanel again, particularly for day wear, although most managed to wiggle into the restricting styles for evening wear. American designer Claire McCardell, who had introduced women to high-end sportswear, becomes a powerful influence in her own right. Based in New York, she was an influential force shaping the American version of style. She designed for real women doing real activities such as driving or riding the subway. She banned restrictive underpinnings and elevated casual, comfortable fabrics such as cotton and knits to high fashion status. She was a modernist whose vision is still evident in the American wardrobe today. Two styles she introduced include the tent style that could be worn loose or belted at the waist. You can see that in the center and on the right-hand side. Another innovation was the wrap dress, which were styles that could be wrapped around the body, fitting as loosely or as tightly as a woman liked. In spite of the whimsies of fashion, couture houses find their customers dwindling away and can no longer support their business entirely with couture customers. They create more affordable offshoots of their designs, sold under a boutique or other label. They are sold as is in standardized sizes. This is called pret-a-porter or high-end ready-to-wear. These upscale fashions were expensive, but not as much as flying to Paris for custom fittings. This practice still continues today. Whenever we see news about Fashion Week in New York, those are commercial buyers placing orders for stores and manufacturers, not individual customers. The fashion industry in America ignored women of color, and in many areas of the country they were barred from purchasing at the same stores that catered to white clientele. In 1958, Eunice Johnson invented the Ebony Fashion Fair, so named because she procured a sponsorship from Ebony magazine. She traveled around the U.S. with a live fashion show to introduce pret-a-porter and couture fashions directly to the African American middle classes. Ms. Johnson used fashion as a way to empower women by raising their expectations and also raising money for their educations. One of her famous quotes sums up her philosophy: "High fashion may be distant, but style is accessible, and it's your right to have it." American mainstream fashion was supplied by ready-to-wear manufacturers who sent buyers to Paris to secretly copy designs on the runway. Every woman had access to some version of the latest styles quickly and affordably. The two most common silhouettes in American fashion for most people are the Corolle line and the pencil line that will coexist as a woman's choice. The shirtwaist dress adapts to the new look with both pencil and full skirt options available. This is an everyday dress for the ideal suburban woman to wear at home or running errands. One important signature look for women is the twin set, two sweaters that match. The undersweater would be sleeveless for comfort, and it's called a shell, and it was worn with a matching cardigan. Detachable pearl, bead, or fur collars could be added to convert the sweater from day to cocktail hour. Another signature look for the 1950s is skinny leg trousers called pencil trousers or cigarette trousers. These were considered extremely modern. They're cut just above the ankle, and some are cut with a stirrup that goes under the foot. We have seen the return of constricting underwear for the 1950s. Bras and girdles will have complex piecing to mold the body. And we have new news. Seamless stockings are introduced just after the end of the war in 1947, but it took much of the 1950s to capture the entire consumer market. In the 1950s, women could purchase a foundation for every outfit, including corsetry, sometimes now called a merry widow, bras, panties, and garter belts. And we have a new innovation, the panty girdle, seen on the left, which is a girdle that has two legs formed into it. The large Corolle skirts are shaped with crinolines. These are layers of stiffened fabric that will hold out the giant skirt. We have a new line of fashion that mass manufacturers make, maternity wear. This is no longer ignored by the fashion market. And the tide turns when very famous women allow themselves to be photographed wearing maternity fashions, Princess Grace of Monaco and movie star Audrey Hepburn. Maternity wear gets a huge boost when television star and producer Lucille Ball allowed her pregnancy to be part of the plot line in her television show. The actual P word for pregnancy was never used, but it was groundbreaking to see it on the air. Maternity fashions will now be available at every price point, and they feature smock tops with pleats or gathers. We have new news in fur fashions. Mink is now the favorite style. Manufacturers will create many styles of fur, and fur stoles and wraps become a favorite new look. The fashion for full animal pelts is out, and these refined furs hide any origin that the fur once had feet or heads. Wealthy women buy full fur coats, and upper middle class women could have one or two smaller furs. Furriers create the idea of owning a fur wardrobe available as wraps, stoles, and boleros. Working women might be able to save for a small fur stole, but they could participate in the same style and panache using cloth boleros and stoles. 1950s fashion has rules. Hats and gloves are mandatory when leaving the house. Short gloves can be worn with sleeveless outfits, and it's also a rule that the purse must coordinate with the shoes. We are seeing the final 20 years of mandatory hats for women who appear in public. Hats will show the same whimsy as fashion with endless variations from the simple to the dramatic. One signature hat for the 1950s is the gripper hat, or half hats, seen on the left. These simpler shapes soon inflamed the urge to decorate, and for the next 20 years we will see endless arrangements of flowers and feathers. On the right, we see a mushroom hat. I am uncertain if it's named for the plant mushroom or the mushroom cloud of the atomic era. We have several exotic styles. The turban no longer sits on the head but slouches down to frame the face. There's a renewed interest in hat shapes from around the world, such as the Cordoba hat from Spain or the rice paddy hat from Southeast Asia. Two other hat shapes include the toque, also called a flower pot, and the beret. Both styles continue from the 1940s. Circle, cartwheel, or pancake hats are popular, seen on the left, as is the pillbox hat on the right. The signature shoe style for this era is the spike or stiletto heel, now an iconic fashion. The toes through the era will go from round to pointy, and the heels become very small and needle-like. Even though we always associate this style with the 1950s, other shoes were widely available and widely worn, such as a Sabrina or kitten heel, seen on the left, walking shoes, and wedge shoes. Flats, penny loafers, and saddle oxfords are worn for leisure. In 1950s, the fashion is for jewelry sets that match, and there's a fashion for very large bangles stacked on the wrist. Brooches become a signal item in very fashionable shapes, and they could come in sets or individual brooches. Large multi-strand necklaces or pearls become fashionable, and sometimes they match the bracelet or the ring. The middle-class version of this is called fruit salad jewelry, often with very exotic influences. This includes very colorful mixes of stones, glass, and plastic. Women's eyeglasses are now overt styles that take facial focus instead of trying to disappear. This is a trend that started in the 1920s for academics, writers, and artists. The new availability of plastics makes colors and shapes widely available and affordable. Women could now own a pair of glasses for every day and a fancy pair for evening with decorations. Most hairstyles in the 1950s required curls to properly style. Hair was generally worn above the collar in specific styles that had to be maintained. White women added curls to their hair, and black women straightened their hair so it could hold the larger round curls of most styles. The bubble cut on the right shows stacks of round curls that frame the face. Many women had to sleep on curlers every night, and for some it meant visiting the beauty parlor once a week in a sacred tradition many kept until the 1980s. Some women began wearing wigs to change their hairstyles quickly and to avoid repeated chemical treatments. The updo styles on the left required longer hair to be pinned up and back in a style I find similar to the Bustle hairstyles of the 1870s. The page boy and soft bob cuts on the left continued some of the freer styles of the 1940s, particularly for young women. It's ironic to me that a period obsessed with traditional definitions of femininity also featured short hair as seen on the right. The pixie cut was an extremely short hairstyle. The Italian cut surrounds the head with curls, and a few specific curls either stand away from the head or curl over the forehead. This is the style that Queen Elizabeth wears even to this day. The bouffant style gains popularity later in the decade and becomes a classic, forming a helmet around the head. Margaret Thatcher wore this hairstyle through the 1980s. In the 1950s, women were literally pushed out of the job market, told to make room for men returning from the war. In one of the saddest stories I know of, I once interviewed a World War II female military pilot who taught men how to fly airplanes for the war. She was retired, and no commercial airline would hire her. She could only get a job as a stewardess. Some of the commercial pilots knew who she was and would secretly allow her to fly once the plane was in the air. I cannot imagine how it would feel to serve soft drinks instead of taxi off the runway. Women were very valued as consumers, however, and urged at every turn to buy millions of dollars of consumer goods every year to fuel the economy. The entire advertising and corporate megaplex made it seem like patriotic duty to support the American dream by being devoted to newer and better purchases. Nothing says more about the 1950s fashion mindset than this trend of mother-daughter dressing created by mass manufacturers. Dressing women like children and training children to dress like adults showed how the lines have blurred. I find it no coincidence that child beauty pageants will begin in a few years in 1961. Our ideal dog in the 1950s is the poodle. It even was its own icon on poodle skirts. The ideal glamour in the 1950s was urban glamour, people living in big cities such as we saw in the TV series Mad Men. The poodle is one of the smartest dog breeds, and they don't shed as much. They're also considered hypoallergenic, so apartment dwellers could share small spaces with them. And their hair can be groomed into different sculptural styles. There was a hairstyle for women named the poodle cut that featured tightly permed, curly hair on top.